Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be covering The Art of War, Chapter 10. We'll have one or two readings, and then we'll go to Jason's translations, and then Jason's translation, I should say. And then we will open it up for comments. So with James, would you mind going ahead and reading your version of the Art of War?
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll start. Terrain. Number one, Sun Tzu said, we may distinguish 6 kinds of terrain, to wit: 1, accessible ground; 2, entangling ground; 3, temporizing ground; 4, narrow passes; 5, precipitous heights; 6, positions at a great distance from the enemy. Ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible. With regard to ground of this nature, be before the enemy in occupying the raised and sunny spots, and carefully guard your line of supplies. Then you will be able to fight with advantage. Ground which can be abandoned but is hard to reoccupy is called entangling. From a position of this sort, if the enemy is unprepared, you may sally forth and defeat him. But if the enemy is prepared for your coming, and you fail to defeat him, then return being impossible, disaster will ensue. When the position is such that neither side will gain by making the first move, it is called temporizing ground. In a position of this sort, even though the enemy should offer us an attractive bait, it will be advisable not to stir forth, but rather to retreat, thus enticing the enemy in his turn. Then, when part of the army has come out, we may deliver our attack with advantage. With regard to narrow passes, if you can occupy them first, let them be strongly garrisoned and await the advent of the enemy. Should the enemy forestall you in occupying a pass, do not go after him if the pass is fully garrisoned, but only if it is weakly garrisoned. With regard to precipitous heights, if you are beforehand with your adversary, you should occupy the raised and sunny spots, and there wait for him to come up. If the enemy has occupied them before you, do not follow him, but retreat and try to entice him away. If you are situated at a great distance from the enemy, and the strength of the two armies is equal, it is not easy to provoke a battle, and fighting will be to your disadvantage. These 6 are the principles connected with earth. The general who has attained a responsible post must be careful to study them.
Thank you very much, James. Appreciate that. Would anybody else like to read their version of The Art of War? Aman, if you'd be so kind.
Sure. This is the Samuel Griffith translation, and he too titles it Terrain with a footnote, topography or conformation of the ground. Sun Tzu said, ground may be classified according to its nature as accessible, entrapping, indecisive, constricted, precipitous, and distant. Ground which both we and the enemy can traverse with equal ease is called accessible. In such ground, he who first takes high sunny positions convenient to his supply routes can fight advantageously. Ground easy to get out of, but difficult to return to, is entrapping. The nature of this ground is such that if the enemy is unprepared and you sally out, you may defeat him. If the enemy is prepared and you go out and engage, but do not win, it is difficult to return. This is unprofitable. Ground equally disadvantageous for both the enemy and ourselves to enter is indecisive. The nature of this ground is such that although the enemy holds out a bait, I do not go forth, but entice him by marching off. When I have drawn out half his force, I can strike him advantageously. If I first occupy constricted ground, I must block the passes and await the enemy. If the enemy first occupies such ground and blocks and defiles, I should not follow him. If he does not block them completely, I may do so. In precipitous ground, I must take position on the sunny heights and await the enemy. If he first occupies such ground, I lure him by marching off. I do not follow him. When at a distance from an enemy of equal strength, it is difficult to provoke battle and unprofitable to engage him in his chosen position. These are the principles relating to 6 different types of ground. It is the highest responsibility of the general to inquire into them with the utmost care. Now, when troops flee, are insubordinate, distressed, collapse in disorder, or are routed, it is the fault of the general. None of these disasters can be attributed to natural causes. Other conditions being equal,
Mom, I think you passed.
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah, basically this one, yeah, right. So this chapter is kind of organized in the way the first paragraph is talking about 6 forms or terrain, 6 kind of terrains. And the next we'll talk about 6 mistakes to fail. Okay, so from the general. So if you were here last week, chapter 9, we took 2 weeks to finish because they have 31 tips tell you about how do you know the information on the enemy. So basics on the chapter 9 is know thy enemy. And from this chapter, probably talking about is know thyself, right? You have to know yourself. And before you know yourself, you have to know what's between you and your enemy. That's the ground. That's the land you are going to fight. So that's why Sun Tzu lists the 6 different kinds of land. And then later on, he will talk about 6 different kinds of mistake or fatal error. Okay, the general had to be careful, should be responsible for that. A few things about the translation. The difficult part is the original text used a lot of Chinese text. Okay, 通卦之意显远. Okay, so basics, that's the single words to have some meaning on that. It's very difficult to find the matching English. So that's one of the great challenges to translate this one. And I translate the title instead of terrain or type of front, I translate as land forms. The reason is 形, okay, this word has been appeared for the entire text. And in general, I translate this word as form. So I don't want the this word form disappear. Okay, that's why I would like to keep the form. So basically, you know, that's the Chinese word 形, which is commonly appeared during the text. So I'm going to read the translation, and then I think Amand did a lot of work to rework on this one because I think this chapter is, in my opinion, is difficult to translate. Master Sun said, the forms of Master Sun, the forms of lands are, okay, so they have the 6 different lands. Those having accessibility, those having quagmires, okay, those having impasses, those having constriction, those having precipices, and those having vast spans between you and the enemy. Number 1, so here is going to list 6 different kinds of land, or I will call it 6 forms of land. Then through which we can go and they come in, then through which we can go and they can come is called accessible. In this accessible form, we shall occupy the high and the sunny spot beforehand and make favorable route for our provisions. Then we will have the advantage to fight. That's accessible. Accessibility is the translation for the Chinese word home. Okay, I think that's a pretty one-to-one translation. And the second one will be a little bit challenging. Then number 2, then which is easy to pass through but difficult to return back from is called quagmire. In this quagmire form, if the enemy is unprepared, we can go forth to win. If the enemy is prepared and we are going forth, we don't win. This is disadvantageous. So I think Among suggests the word quagmire, and I think that my understanding of this word is some swamp or something, and it's easy to go, difficult to back. I hope Among will explain later on this one, and I think that's a good one. Okay, but I call it a hanging because the Chinese word called gua, right? Gua means something hanging. If you have something hanging down, you probably will be easy, means unidirectional. You can going down easy, going back is difficult. And I think that's the reason it called it gua. Okay. So, but it called it hanging, it sounds very strange in English. I think that's the reason Among will suggest use a quagmire. Okay. Number 3. Then which is to our disadvantage if we advance forward, and for their disadvantage if they move forward, is called impasses. So that means whoever moves first will have a disadvantage. In the form of impasses, even though we have an advantage over the enemy, we ought not to move forward. We shall retreat to entice the enemy and attack them while they are halfway out. This is advantageous. So Among also suggests a good word called impasses. Okay, the Chinese word here is called zhi. Okay, zhi means that if you have a few sticks, they lean on each other, so kind of like a deadlock, right? So you support each other. So which stick you remove, then the rest will collapse. Okay, that's why in Chinese called zhi, but I call it deadlock, or I call it standoff, and Among suggests impasses. Okay, so it's hard to find the meaning, an English word match with the original meaning and the implied meaning on that. So I think impasses is probably the choice we have to use. Number 4, the constricted form. In the constricted form, if we occupy the passage first, we should be fully prepared and wait for the enemy. If the enemy occupied the passage first, we shall not go after them if they are fully prepared, but do go after them if they are not fully prepared. Number 5, in the precipices form, if we occupy the height first, we shall garrison on the high and the sunny spot and wait for the enemy. If they occupied the height first, we shall retreat and entice them, but never follow them. Number 6, in the vast spans form, if the shi of both sides are evenly matched, it will be difficult to challenge. It is disadvantageous to fight. So the conclusion here, knowing these 6 forms are the Tao of lands is the ultimate responsibility of the general. It is a subject that must be examined. So I think this sentence appears many times. This is a subject that must be examined. Okay, so basics here, very clear. Knowing the 6 forms of land, I think he means recognize these 6 different kind of form of land is the highest responsibility for the general. Okay, general, that's the general's responsibility. Okay, so I'll stop here, and Aman, that's your turn.
Thank you very much. And since you called me out, I'm going to have to say a word or two about Wu and Zhi. The reason I went with quagmire for Wu is not so much a direct denote, because Jason's right, it does mean to hang or hook, or it can even be like hanging up a phone, but it's also a slang that could be used if something is botched or you like failed an exam. You know, I got hung up on it. And colloquially, the meaning of it is very similar to how we use the term quagmire now. You saw, I believe, in the Giles translation where he calls it entangled, and in Griffith's translation, he refers to it as entrapping. Take those ideas, mesh them together, and the word quagmire just fits so well. Plus, we've heard it for decades now as something to avoid in military affairs, something to be wary of, something that is inevitable if you're not careful, is being caught in a quagmire, hung up, entangled, and unable to escape. And as far as Zhi goes, Jason's absolutely correct, and the character itself actually does look like you can almost picture sticks supporting one another. Yeah, right there, holding one another up. I will share a guilty pleasure that I'm not that guilty about. I watch a lot of Naked and Afraid. I don't know why. There's just something about it that I find very compelling. But being able to balance a figure 4 trap is a common skill you see these people actually engage in primitive survival. And this idea of those sticks actually supporting one another precariously is really what that image is meant to communicate. In fact, it could actually be used as a idiom for support. You somebody if you're supporting them or holding them in place, holding them, helping them stay steady. And so again, finding something colloquially that translated well, impasse seems like the perfect standoff term for military parlance, because it is almost like these two battle ready forces collide, and then they're trapped in a position where one can't push further or retreat, and vice versa. And so you find yourself at an impasse, which we mean as a crossroad, a place where two things can't cross one another without colliding. But the images are almost identical there. So that's where the logic for this comes from. And as far as the amount of work, it was a pleasure. It was one of the more difficult chapters to go through and do this because of the subtleties of language that don't always communicate directly from a strict dictionary translation of Chinese into English, but the meaning is meant to be there. And you kind of have to dig for it a little bit.
Thank you for that, Aman. So now, everyone, it's up to you. If you have any comments, feel free to raise your hand or type an exclamation point in Zoom.
David, question.
Okay, David, I think James had actually had his hand up first. So, or David, did you have a quick question or?
Yeah. It was on number 2, and the translation which I'm using, which is exactly what James read. It seemed to have an opposite sense in the translation, and I'm wondering what is going on. The second type that's described in the PDF translation that's available online calls the entrapping easy to enter and hard to leave. So it sort of sounds like the opposite, which is more of what a quagmire is. Oh, you can wander in, but now you're sinking into the land. That's what a quagmire is. And it's the opposite of entangling, which is sort of leaving is easy. And if the enemy, therefore it's hard to recapture if you leave this area. So are these both senses of the same area, or are they different ideas, or is one translation taking?
Yeah, David, I got your point. Thank you. Okay, so the meaning, forget about the translation word. The meaning means some place. Imagine the place, probably like a hook or something, right? Narrow, right? So you easy to go enter, but when you come back, it's difficult, right? Just like you want to trap the bee, right? When the bee go inside the bottle, okay, but it cannot fly out, right? So what kind of word, if you have to pick 1 or 2 words in English, what kind of word you will suggest? That's the question I will ask you,
And I would actually justify this by saying, I think the Giles translation, he says this is land that's easy to enter and difficult to leave, which is true of it. And the Griffith says something much to the same lines, around which both the enemy, easy to get out of, but difficult to return. This is a play of the words to go and to come back, which we think of in very literal terms, but to go into a land and to come back out of a land is sort of the connotation there. The Chinese modern version would be chu and lai, but I don't think that's exactly what Sun Tzu says here.
So just so you hear how wrong this translation sounds, it merely says ground which can be abandoned, but it's hard to reoccupy, is called entangling. So that sounds like they've really botched the concept.
I would agree with that. And I think it comes down to that translation of chu, to come out or go out or to leave from. You leave from your house when you go to work. You leave from your home base when you go to a battleground. And that's actually what I believe is being communicated. And I thought Griffith did a little bit better of it. Giles was a little long in the tooth in his translation, and I just think he got it wrong, frankly.
That's all. I was just asking. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, David. So we'll go to James. James, thank you for your patience.
That's quite all right. Okay, so I wanted to point out the 6 the 6 aspects of this. The point that there's an accessibility, a kind of like an entangling quagmire. There's the impasse, which is the 3rd, and the constrictive, or what Giles calls the narrow passes. And yeah, and the precipice type of land, which And then the last one is the
Distance.
well, that's the last one, the precipice. And there's there's the temporizing, which that's, yeah, Giles calls the impasse, the temporizing land. So it's like neither side has an advantage, but if you can figure out a way to get the enemy's forces reduced, like they're halfway out, then that would be an advantage. So out of this kind of like deadlock or impasse, there could be ways of finding advantages, but they would not be to just advance forward and meet the enemy directly. So the quagmire side so is very difficult. The narrow passage, or I really like that one, because that means that you know that there's a geographical difficulty for either for your forces or the other forces. But if you are the one with the forces there, then if you have a position in the constricted passage, then that is a big advantage, because if you're fully garrisoned and you're ready to fight, then you have an advantage over the enemy. If the enemy has that advantage, then you should not attack them using that passage. So this is where information is really important. On the high ground, obviously, if it's a high and sunny spot, that gives you a slight advantage because you've got the sun at your back, so you've got this optical advantage. So that can be a good advantage to have. That's the fifth, and the sixth is the I don't know. Is that the summary?
Distant.
Mhm.
It's distance? No.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Number
Oh,
6
okay.
is the distance. Some translation is distant or far away land, because they are
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you're
the
situated
enemy
at a great
very
distance,
far away.
right? Right. And so the disadvantage is that you're probably going to have the possibility of exhausting your troops during your transport to the land. So I think that's basically the main concern. If it's at a distance, it may not be the time to really plot your actual tactics, because you don't have the familiarity with the terrain. I'm thinking that maybe somebody else has more ideas about that, but I think it's a good division. This is a good division regarding types of terrain or landforms. I think it's a really good summary of the type of terrain that soldiers are going to be fighting on. That's all.
I appreciate those comments. Does anybody else have any comments about this passage? I would only add to that is that I was trying to kind of brainstorm as to what would be in addition to this list. And I had difficulties actually coming up with anything. So, if anybody has any thoughts on that, I would actually be very interested. But does anybody else have any comments regarding accessibility? Anne, please go ahead.
Yeah, it seems to me what's missing in here is a very, he talks about deserts and plains, but you've obviously got forests, so that, that's a missing terrain.
I would also add, Jason pointed out in the chat, and water, but ancient China had no navy. These sort of forms of land include whether desert, tundra, jungle, forest, because any one of those sort of climate zones may contain these aspects.
Right.
I forget
Yeah.
which chapter it was, but you know, he already covered forests. There was a
believe-
chapter in which he covered that.
He covered terrain as well, especially like the idea of having high ground when a group of soldiers are retreating necessarily. I believe, I forget what chapter that might have been. Maybe Aman or Jason recall, but it is covered to a certain degree, but not to this this level of detail. So it has been covered throughout, and obviously it's one of the principles that if you refer back to chapter 1 with heaven and earth, you know, that's something to also consider. And Aman put in the chapter 9, he believes. Okay, that sounds about right. I think that.
Let me have some explanation on the way Sun Tzu categorized the form of land. Probably that my translation may cause confusion on that. The form, I don't know this word form. I don't know how people think about this one, because you may think about platonic form. You may think about physical form, right? Like this form, or it's a circle or stick. We don't know. Okay, so I think that may cause the problem. But what I'd like to mention is the form is not limited on how it looked like. Based more on the functional, category.
Right.
So I understand this one based on reading the book, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is the novel writing in the Ming Dynasty in the 16th or 17th century, who talk about the story in the 2nd or 3rd century. Okay, so complex, but the story basics, when you travel to a certain place, the argument will be, oh, this one we should do this according to the book of military. They didn't talk about the book Art of War. They talk about according to the book. This one we should do this. Then the other will say no. It looked like the form of the form of quagmire, but actually it's not, because blah, blah, blah. So this kind of category is not just like by look. So categorize it when you see the land, to put in the right category. It requires some experience, some knowledge on that.
So this is when I looked at this, I looked at this as more of a framework, as you know, kind of what category, and then you can put the details, the particulars that are necessarily underneath there, and how to execute underneath each one of these categories. So I actually literally kind of drew it out in a set of boxes as if these were 6 different, categories that you could actually then figure out strategically how you would approach it from an objective. What would be your objective under each one of these categories, and then also from another perspective, what is your capability and the ability to actually execute in this type of terrain is something else to consider when you're thinking about it. So you have your infrastructure, so to speak, on one end, and you would actually have your goals and objectives on another. And I think that maps into a strategy where you have these as I wouldn't go so far as to call them principles, but these would be at least categories that you could execute under. So with that, I would say, David.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm agreeing with what you're saying, Joe, and just before you, what was said, that it's functional. It's not a physical property of the terrain. In some cases, it's how the terrain's going to function. So in this, I mean, some terrains are just actually large passes in mountains, and those are constrictive. That's what they are. But the question about forest is interesting, because it's sort of equal access and disadvantageous to come upon, because you can't really camp spreading out, you know, creating a boundary. You still can be impinged on because it's constantly offering ways for people to hide as they come closer. So it's really an impasse in a general sense. But if you manage it correctly, maybe you can turn it into a constrictive environment for the people who are coming at you. So yeah, and this is saying if it is constrictive, first in has the advantage, here's what to do. But generally, just as an environment, a forest on a plain, you know, not on a mountain with a particular advantage in one direction, is an impasse. So yeah, this is a way to think of how something's going to be functionally, and might change, you know, in a certain way.
Absolutely, yeah. Very good observations, and it absolutely could change at any moment. So with that, we'll go to Aman. Thank you.
Yeah, I like what David just had to say, and I think I'm just going to recapitulate it a little differently, is that it's very tempting because of how detailed oriented this text is to read it like a cookbook, like he's setting out recipes with very specific formula. And what Sun Tzu was actually attempting to do was a little more ambitious than that, but I don't think they certainly did not have the language of it then. We would refer to it as a system of systems. So when looking at something like the terrain, there are so many micro systems involved in that single battlefield or battleground that you're looking at. And so he's putting an overarching category on this and saying, here are the forms that can take in terms of what they will impart necessarily from their own structure, from where you are, from the circumstance and situation, but also from the set structure of the thing. This is different than sure. You want to build sure to your advantage, and you need to know what the form is to know what sort of advantage you can begin to build there. So in addition to these, and I think this gets lost because we read it like a recipe book, are the refrains of, if you see this, then this is what you do, or this is what you don't do. We should occupy the high ground. We can go forth and win if they're unprepared, but if they're prepared, don't go forth. Don't move forward, entice them with your retreat. He's giving you sort of a if X then Y system of systems that then you have to plug the variables of the actual situation into and see how best they fit that formula. He couldn't have described it that way at the time, but that is part of the incredible ambition of this text, is that he's trying to do something more than simply provide a recipe book, which is unfortunately how not just we, but generations of readers have read the text and tried to follow the formula exactly.
That's a great observation. Yeah, I mean, I think that people do look at this and say, and almost regurgitate it in certain ways, as if this is something that automatically, these are a set of rules that you will follow, and then automatically you'll win in battle. When it still requires quite a bit of strategy and thinking as to, you know, what your, again, as I just mentioned previously, what the objective is and what your current abilities are. And those are variables that have to be plugged in to figure out how it fits into this framework. And I think that to look at it as just a set of rules would probably lead to your own demise, I would guess. So very good observation. Yeah, and I it's unfortunate that I think that that's why it's very important to look at the first chapter and think about the principles. Those are principles in the beginning, and then think about how to function underneath those principles. And terrain is one of those things. So with that, we'll go to Quan.
Okay, so concerning the title of the chapter, teaching, I would say that if we have to take the two words together, teasing, it's truly about the physical configuration of the terrain. Okay, but however, I agree with everything that has been said, because we have to play with the two words. Okay, teasing is truly the physical shape of the terrain, but at the same time, sing, which the most general word for that is form, but form, we have like, I would say that there's no perfect translation for that sing, because that sing has many layers of meaning, and form being the most general translation. And I think that keeping form is just perfect. But I just want to say that under that word form, you have the idea of configurations, of conformations, of patterns, of design, of constraints, even of shape. So to go back a little bit, what Jason said 10 minutes ago, yes, teasing is the physical configuration, but sing will bring to everything that is more in the mental space of the commander, taking into account the constraints of the physical configuration of the ground, creating designs, structures, patterns in his mind to react to that physical configuration. So that's here we have a perfect example that Chinese can be really, really multi-layers, from the physical reality to the mind reality. That's, well, Chinese is a poetic, a natural poetic language, meaning that you can go from the physical reality to the mind reality, to the epistemological reality and the axiological reality very easily, because the boundary are not so fixed. And that example of sing that can be, I think, translated, I repeat the 5 words that I prefer for that sing. Teasing would be translated as physical configuration, that's for sure. But sing alone, I would say that forms, patterns, configuration, conformation, constraint, and structure would be very interesting, among other things.
Very much appreciate that, Quan. If you do look at this, I mean, it can be applied in a number of different ways. If you look at this list of 6, even in today's world, like in the sense that if I were to say, what is my market? You know, what is the terrain? What does it look like? You would start to ask some very similar questions, not totally dissimilar would be. One of them is, it's 2 armies that are equal in the sense that if you're going after a market, you know, who's the current, you know, leader in that market? Do you have enough to compete? So essentially what we're talking about here is, in a way, I look at it as boundaries. You're setting boundaries. And then how to function in those boundaries. I don't know if anybody necessarily agrees or disagrees with that, but I would actually appreciate any comments. If not, then we can actually start to think about going to the next one.
If I may, 10 seconds.
Please, I hope you disagree.
No. Well, when you speak about the layers of a complex word, I would say that there's no agreement or disagreement, but rather the exploration of the different depths of that word in terms of mental complexity. And when you say the boundaries, well, it goes back to one of the translation that I proposed for sing, okay, constraints. In the sense that when you meet some phenomenal reality in life, being a ground for military battle or anything else, because of that physical configuration of that phenomenal reality, it will impose a certain constraint. Or either in poetry, for example, if in a poetry you have to compose something that at each line you have 4 syllables and that you have 6 lines, well, that's a constraint. But from that constraint, you will be capable to create an infinite numbers of poems. So you see that it's the dialectical rapport between being and becoming, but here in the specific situation of warfare.
That's beautifully said. It's a dialectical rapport. It's you're doing the analysis, you're synthesizing, and you're coming up with something that's knowledgeable and that you can act upon. And so I like that how you phrase that. So I think that that's a very good way to think about it, if I captured that correctly.
Sure.
Okay. So, yeah, I can think of a lot of different ways to approach this, but we can go on to number 2, I guess. We've been going at it for a little bit of time here, so.
Shall I start?
Please, yeah, thank you, James.
Okay. For the Martin Giles, I believe.
Correct.
Now an army is exposed to 6 several calamities, none arising from natural causes, but from the faults for which the general is responsible. These are flight, insubordination, collapse, ruin, disorganization, and rout. Other conditions being equal, if one force is hurled against another 10 times its size, the result will be the flight of the former. When the common soldiers are too strong and their officers are too weak, the result is insubordination. When the officers are too strong and the common soldiers are too weak, the result is collapse. When the higher officers are angry and insubordinate, and on meeting the enemy give battle on their own account from a feeling of resentment, before the commander-in-chief can tell whether or not he is in a position to fight, the result is ruin. When the general is weak and without authority, when his orders are not clear and distinct, when there are no fixed duties assigned to officers and men, and the ranks are formed in a slovenly, haphazard manner, the result is utter disorganization. When a general, unable to estimate the enemy's strength, allows an inferior force to engage a larger one, or hurls a weak detachment against a powerful one, and neglects to place picked soldiers in the front rank, the result would be a rout.
Well read. Thank you, James.
One more sentence.
Sorry?
One more sentence.
Well, the next sentence I have is the natural
Six.
formation of the country is the soldier's best ally. But
I have, these are 6 ways of courting defeat,
Yeah.
which must be carefully noted by the general who has attained a responsible post.
okay, thank you, Joseph and Jason.
Yeah, no problem.
That was a great reading,
that was the last
Joseph.
one.
I won't repeat it.
Okay, yeah,
these are the 6 ways of courting defeat.
That's right.
Yeah.
So now I'll read to where I originally thought I was reading to the first time. Verse 2. Now, let me make sure I'm in the right spot.
It's
Sorry, this
difficult with that
translation is just
Yeah.
a pain. Yeah.
It is, because you got to find different spots with it. I've seen it.
Right. Now, when troops flee, are insubordinate, distressed, collapse and disorder, are routed, it is the fault of the general. None of these disasters can be attributed to natural causes. Other conditions being equal, if a force strikes one 10 times its size, the result is flight. When troops are strong and officers weak, the army is insubordinate. When the officers are valiant and the troops ineffective, the army is in distress. When senior officers are angry and insubordinate, and on encountering the enemy, rush into battle with no understanding of the feasibility of engaging, and without awaiting orders from the commander, the army is in a state of collapse. When the general is morally weak and his discipline not strict, when his instructions and guidance are not enlightened, when there is no consistent rule to guide the officers and men, and when the formations are slovenly, the army is in disorder. When a commander, unable to estimate his enemy, uses a small force to engage a large one, or weak troops to strike the strong, or when he fails to select shock troops for the van, the result is rout. When any of these 6 conditions prevails, the army is on the road to defeat. It is the highest responsibility of the general that he examine them carefully.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Aman.
So if we remember on the chapter 1, okay, we talk about Sun Tzu talk about the 5 principles, 5 things, right? The Tao, the heaven, the earth, the general, the method. So we already done with the earth. Okay, so we talk about the land. Okay, so here it's going to talk about the general. Okay, again, we talk about know your enemy and know yourself and know the land. Okay, so here you talk about know yourself. And then another thing is Sun Tzu is to give more and more responsible to the general. Okay, because remember at I think the chapter 7, not all command from the ruler you need to follow. Okay, you don't have to follow all the command. Not because you can do whatever you want, because you have very, very heavy responsibility. So here Sun Tzu is give very detail, okay, 6 situations. That's your responsibility, the general responsibility. You have no way out. So if you lose your head, that's because of this. That's you, okay? Don't blame on anybody. So here he lists the 6 different situations. And I think my understanding is it's one to one get worse and worse. Okay, that's my understanding. And then actually I'm quite happy Among and I work out the words, the 6 words, 走持现崩乱北. These 6 words, and I think we find out the right word to match each single one. So that's the part I think we did a great job on this one. So furthermore, an army can be in the unfavorable condition of being given to flight, to fleeing, okay, basically to given to flight, to fleeing, to entanglement, to collapse, to turmoil, and to defeat. I think one to one get worse and worse. These six are not natural disasters. They are caused by the mistakes of the general. Okay, so here he said, if the shi of both sides are evenly matched, then, okay, I think the logically, Sun Tzu put this very logical way, right? So the shi of both sides, basics, we are not talking about the enemy is much stronger, he talked about on the condition, the shi, okay, the situation is almost evenly matched. Then, okay, so 6 situation, that's general's fault, okay. When one force fight against force 10 times in size, this leads to flight. Number 2, when the soldiers are strong, but their officers are weak, this leads to fleeing. Number 3, when the officers are strong, but the soldiers are weak, this leads to entanglement. Number 4, when the leading officers are indignant and insubordinate, they fight against the enemy for themselves with hatred, and the general doesn't know their capabilities. This leads to collapse. Number 5, When the general is weak and unauthoritative, creeds and the directions, okay, the words he used here is doubts, okay, are unclear. Officers and the soldiers have no fixed duty. Military formations are disordered. This leads to turmoil. When the general is unable to estimate the enemy's strength, confront many with a few, attack the strong force with the weak force, and has no selective elite heralds, this leads to defeat. Knowing that these six are the Tao of failure, okay, so Tao could be used on the negative way, right? 败之道, the Tao of failure or the way of failure. It is the ultimate responsibility of the general and a subject that must be examined. Thank you, Aman.
Thank you, Jason. And here on number 3 there, you can see why I went with quagmire before, because some of the translations before wanted to use as entangled ground, because it does mean hang up. But here, the actual word xian really does mean more to be entangled or trapped or stuck in a pitfall. And I agree with Jason. I liked how his logic is escalating, because I didn't pick that out of the original translations that I had read, but it makes sense as I look through it, and the descriptions of conditions become more in depth, more detailed. Obviously, again, thinking of this in terms of system of systems, he says one force fights against 10. That doesn't mean that one force fighting against 9 isn't going to be susceptible to this. It means you need to make the measure of, does it appear, is the environment, like I put in the chat, one that will lead your soldiers to flight because they feel like they're facing an army 10 times their size? And it doesn't matter if you say, well, no, I'm a good officer, I'm really strict with my people. No, if you are perceived as weak and you have deserters, well, that is condition 2. And if you are strong, but your soldiers are kind of middling, then you're going to be entangled, constantly trying to get them to simply form a line and march in a straight line or direction. So again, giving you a broad sort of canopy to put your conditions under, to think, how serious is this? Is this just a little insubordination on one person's part, or am I looking at collapse within my ranks? Am I looking at the utter defeat of my ranks because I'm not getting good intel, I'm making bad estimations, I'm sending too few people to attack way too many? Am I just making all the wrong moves? I liked the translation Jason did here, and I agree. I'm going to break my arm patting myself on the back on this, because it did take a lot of scrutiny to really find good word choice options that captured what was being expressed here, which is an escalating conditions of peril. We've simplified this in the West to defensive condition 5, defensive condition 4, 3. I think 1, is it DEFCON 1 is actually the worst and DEFCON 5 is the least worst. I don't remember, but those sort of simplifications he's capturing here in a very prototype of, here's how you can measure how well or how poorly things are going, and maybe give you a place to look to for why it's going poorly.
That's a wonderful observation. And yes, I really did appreciate how you actually captured each one of these rules, I'll call them, so for potential calamity. And I think that this is actually a very important part. So is there anybody that has any comments that they wish to share on this? If not, go ahead, James. Thank you.
Yeah, DEFCON 1 is definitely the worst. You don't want to get there. I like the psychological stuff when it sort of appears. There, I guess you use the word entanglement, but it's this idea of the insubordination being is a problem in itself, because the soldiers are too strong and the officers are weak, and this is true in some armies. I think that there's insubordination. The soldiers have to do things on their own because they don't trust the officers, and then on the other hand, if the officers are too strong, and that obviously that results in collapse. The soldiers have to have their own kind of value. And the other one was this idea about the gosh, I lost the page. There it is. The higher officers being indignant, and the leading officers being indignant and insubordinate. Because that's kind of like, well, what is that? That's like ego trip, right? They're insubordinate, and they got, mental problems. It's mental health, or what they call in the army. Yeah, they're not supposed to have mental problems in the army. They're supposed to have bad morale. So they have bad morale. So they fight against the enemy for themselves, not for the country, not for their officers, not for their general, and they fight with hatred. And the general is not able to get good information because he's just basically conducting the war through a bunch of hotheads. So that leads to a situation with collapse, and then he so yeah. So I'm kind of the only thing I wanted to ask, why did you decide to use the word heralds? It has no selected heralds. Isn't that really awfully 19th century and religious sounding? You wouldn't want to send angels to war, but hark the herald angels sing, right? It's like
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for asking this. Okay. Yeah. That's a good question. And then because I give myself a task. I want to make sure the words, each word, I try to have every word reflected in English. So I do herald because this word, okay, phone, okay, that means the sharp, okay, the knife, okay, it's the sharp side, okay, you call it phone, this word, okay. If you see these words, okay, that means if you have a knife, right, on the cutting side, the sharp part of that, okay, they call phone, okay, very sharp. So that's why I call it herald, okay. And then in modern Chinese, we call the herald as 先锋, the first phone, okay, the one on the first. Okay, so first, so that's the reason I picked this word, and of course, any suggestion?
Actually, the British, I know the British Army uses they call their picked men. They call their picked men their sharps. Those are the sharps.
Yeah,
so I
I
like
think,
the fact that you said sharps, Jason, because that's what the British use. Yeah,
I think the Giles translation says van, and it's meant as shorthand for vanguard. But
Vanguard.
Jason's right; it means a sharp tool and generally a spearhead. So that
Okay.
herald and spearhead seem to fit well together, even though it is a little antiquated language.
well, Giles says picked soldiers. The Giles says picked soldiers.
Yeah,
in the
pig
front
soldier
rank.
is the pig soldier, but
Yeah.
pig soldier is the front for the front. Okay, so
Yeah.
elite.
The word elite, right? The word
Elite.
elite is
They
also
select the
matching.
elite and put in the front. Okay, so that's the meaning in Chinese.
Vanguard. Yeah. So spearhead, we know what that means. Herald isn't really a religious term. It's more a term of noble. It's the ones that the flag represented, and they got represented on the flag because they were the primaries. They were known as the leaders. So it is a kind of appropriate term, but we're not used to it. So it's really kind of jarring to hear. And the thing I was going to point out, other than that discussion, was we have a certain parallel between numbers 2 and 3 and numbers 4 and 5. 2 has the officers, the leaders are weak and the soldiers are strong, and they're rebelling their attitudes towards the leaders bad, and that's turned around in the next phase where the officers are too strong. So we go from insubordination to a sort of a collapse of the ability to function. Then 4 and 5 are the same thing at the highest level, where the officers are taking too much on them and they're ignoring their generals, and they're going ahead as though they're the ones who should be leading. They're not respecting the hierarchy and the power that the general, and the responsibility of the general is ultimate, and the knowledge of the general is ultimate. So they're rebelling against their officers, their hierarchy again. And the next stage after that is the general is unable to, even though making orders and things, is ordering inappropriately. Go fight here, go do this here, and is acting as though there's strength in his commands, and he's actually making poor commands. So he's lacking this intelligence, and he is claiming a strength he doesn't really represent. So there's a sort of a parallel between 2, 3, and 4 and 5 at a higher level.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation, David. There are parallels here, and it's just showing the importance of balance overall and order within this dynamic. And this is something that I think that exists not only, this, again, we can apply this to anything where we work, in a family. Sometimes I hear, I have one friend, and I feel like telling him his children are, the inmates are running the asylum, so that there's an imbalance, so to speak, between the leadership and the subordinates. And I think so this can actually exist at any level. And as well as in an organization, you want very much a horizontal organization where there is, proper communication and belief in your leadership, but you still don't have this actual disorganization that's going on. So this is an important set of rules to look at how you're structured organizationally. Also, I think there's elements of showing you when you have emotions in the idea in battle. When you talk about things of when you start resenting your officers that are above you, you're letting your emotions to get the best of you, or if your officers are resenting you, and you're going to be hell-bent on going into this battle no matter what, you're then not necessarily acting rationally. And that's one of the most important things when you're talking about going into battle or actually making any kind of decision, that you don't necessarily want to let your emotions to dictate your actions. And if you do probably go into the battle, you will be routed. Also, the idea of flight, when I was thinking about that in particular, I just see that as something as common sense, that you don't necessarily take on something 10 times your own size. However, I would say this kind of, it depends on your, what 10 times really means. If you are taking on people with, you have guns and they have sticks, that may mean a little bit different. So technology actually does play a role when you think about it from that perspective. Anyway, so James.
Yeah, just really quick, I maybe Harold means something that you don't think it means. I mean, herald is supposed to be an officer that's on special duty to be to give proclamations or go to foreign dignitaries and speak to foreign dignitaries. That's what a herald is. He's a type of officer that's struck off in order to make speeches or to visit foreigners. You know, that it's not a type of fighter. That's why I just don't think it was a good choice.
Yeah, I think thank you, James, and thank you, David, to bring up the herald, because each person will understand the words, even the English word, differently. So I don't see about the religious, I see us as the fighting, but probably.
I'm telling you what the dictionary says.
Yeah.
It's a soldier that's struck off to make proclamations or to send messages to a foreign power.
Yeah, I also realized this part. So instead of doing this, and Amon and I just decide to change to spearhead. So
Oh, there you go.
yeah, that would be, actually nobody will misunderstood as you put the soldier as a spearhead physically. They all know it's a metaphorically. So, that'll be fine.
So are there any other comments? I think that this is a very important section because it just talks about the balance of relationships in general, and you can apply it to almost every relationship that you're in, that there shouldn't necessarily be an imbalance, and that you should all be on the same page. I think also this leads to kind of lends itself to one of the principles that we covered earlier on with the moral law. And the moral law being that you are willing to complete your job, but that's in accordance with the ruler, not necessarily the officers in the general. So that's a little bit different, but same concept. Amon and Ann.
I actually almost wanted to let Ann go first, but I just wanted to reiterate this idea of weak, because I shared this once before about Sun Tzu's job interview, where he took the princeling's concubines and had them run drills, and when they failed to understand him, put the first two to death, his favorite two concubines, despite the princeling's protest, and then ran the drills again with absolute precision. This was a nice little anecdote of what, first of all, there's an implicit, what do they mean by weak soldiers? Well, they're talking about, he's getting a cohort of women to run these drills. And so to the minds of antiquated Chinese, this would be the weakest of possible soldiers, but you can shape them through rigid, absolute, clear, concise leadership to be a fighting force and do what you want them to do. But this was in the context of conscripted armies. So when he talks about the generals being strong, but the soldiers being weak, he is in fact talking about conscripted men who may have not picked up a weapon once in their entire lives and now are being marched out onto the battlefield. And so the onus falls on the head of the general to shape these men into a fighting force. That's one of the sort of subtext of this section. And if they are not, it's his failure to actually do his due diligence and shape and instill that discipline in the first place.
Excellent points. And that comes back to the idea of knowing your army, knowing your capabilities, and not only you're also supposed to know your enemies, but at the same time, yes, know what the limits are or the boundaries are of the people that you're governing. Ann, please.
Yeah, I've been thinking a little bit about the 6 types of land, and then he moves into or shifts into the 6 types of failures or calamities. And I'm wondering if he, as an author, is trying to gain a little runway with his intended audience by laying out the land stuff first, and then really drilling into the hard stuff, which is that the 6 calamities derive from the lack of capability of the general. So, anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting move on his part to place that as sort of a second.
So
Yeah.
we have 2 more hands up, but I just really quickly, and we do need to move on. But if Quan and Ian can be very quick, I'd appreciate it, because we're running a little bit behind. But I think we can come back to your point, and I think it's a very valid one. What constitutes this title of this chapter is terrain. So what are we talking about here? And the terrain seems to have expanded to the actual military itself. So I think that's part of knowing the terrain, both on a on a level of the actual ground, but also knowing the terrain of your own military capabilities. So anyway, Quan, followed by Ian.
I will be super fast. Okay.
Okay.
What Anne said is perfect. Okay. Just remember the hexagram 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you have terrain 1, terrain 2, terrain 3, terrain 4, terrain 5, terrain 6. 1 is the physical reality. 2 is the terrain of the intellect. 3 is the terrain of your heart, of your emotional stability, of your capability to be open to the higher domain of the timeless dimension. And terrain 4, 5, 6 are very easy. Paragraph 2.4 of the Analects by Confucius, or if you want, beauty, goodness, and truth. And I have finished.
Very good. That's thank you very much, and well said. Ian.
Yeah, just very quick, just about the term Fong and the Shen Fong term there. I looked at the Cantonese Wikipedia page and it said vanguard. So maybe,
Okay.
yeah, and it's like maybe just for next time for everyone, like Cantonese and Hokkien are nearer to the ancient languages. So maybe that could be an alternative source. But yeah,
Great.
not that I can read this, but yeah, that's what
Very good.
found out. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I very much appreciate that contribution. So with that, we will move on to passage 3. And
Okay.
James, if you'd be so kind.
The natural formation of the country is the soldier's best ally, but a power of estimating the adversary, of controlling the forces of victory, and of shrewdly calculating difficulties, dangers, and distances constitutes the test of a great general. He who knows these things and in fighting puts his knowledge into practice will win his battles. He who knows them not, nor practices them, will surely be defeated. If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight, even at the ruler's bidding. The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom.
Thank you so much for that, James. David wishes to read, if that's okay with you, Oman. Okay.
No, I just have the same translation, James. It's fine. It's good. He's reading.
There we go. I was trying to get you off the hook there, Oman. So you get to skim through the different sections now.
I got my voice. I've been doing it all week with students. So section 3. Yes,
correct.
Confirmation of the ground is the greatest assistance in battle. Therefore, to estimate the enemy's situation and to calculate distances and the degree of difficulty of the terrain so as to control victory are virtues of the superior general. He who fights with full knowledge of these factors is certain to win. He who does not will surely be defeated. If the situation is one of victory, but the sovereign has issued orders not to engage, the general may decide to fight. If the situation is such that he cannot win, but the sovereign has issued orders to engage, he need not do so. And therefore the general, who in advancing does not seek personal fame, and in withdrawing is not concerned with avoiding punishment, but whose only purpose is to protect the people and to promote the best interests of his sovereign, is the precious jewel of the state.
Thank you very much for that, Aman. Jason.
Yes. Okay, so before I read it, let me quickly respond to what Anne's point on the people and the land. I think remember on the 10.1, right? We talk about the sixth form of land. And then Sun Tzu gives a version, knowing this six, right? So the form of land is there, right? We and the enemy are facing the same form of land, okay? So knowing, okay, and or how to use this land is the job of general, okay? So still put the general in charge on that. Then he talked about 6 ways of failure, okay, which also general is responsible. So in my understanding is you need to know this and you don't make this 6 mistake. So I think that's his tone on this. And he is going more on what general, the character of the general. Okay, so here I think that's important. Okay, so the land form are the auxiliary for military operation, only the auxiliary. Okay, it's not the main thing. You need to know it. It's to help you on that. Estimating the enemy force to secure the victory and the planning for dangers, difficulties, and the distance are the Tao for the superior general. Knowing this and applying it in war leads to victory. Not knowing this and not applying this in war leads to defeat, right? So just reflect to the End's point, like the form of land and the general, the relationship. The general needs to know that and needs to know how to apply it, right? That leads to victory or defeat. You need to know it and apply it. Thus, if the Tao of fighting must be victory, then the fight can continue, even if the ruler call for it to stop. Okay, so here again, general responsibility. If the general know it, you know you are winning. Even the ruler, your boss, tell you come back, you don't come back. Okay, you still go for it. If the Tao of fighting is not to be victory, the fight can stop, even if the ruler demands it. Even the ruler say go for it, you need to do it. If you know you're not going to win, you need to stop it. Okay, that's very important, and that's ultra heavy responsibility for the general. And the number 3 also very important. So talking about the character as a general. Thus, the general who advances without pursuing his fame and retreating without issuing the accusation or disgrace, right? Whose only goal is to protect the people and to benefit his lord is the treasure of the state. So I think these 3 sentences are very important and basics. I think these 3 sentences answer what End's question, right? He talk about the relationship between the land, I call it the land form, and then the general. The general need to know it, need to know how to apply it. And based on this, you will know, you know the enemy, know yourself, and know the land. Then you should know this war, this battle is going to be a victory or defeat. And if you know it, do it. Go advance or retreat based on your judgment, not based on the ruler's intention, right? So when you decide to make advance, not because you want to get a fame, okay? If you decide to retreat, you don't worry about your reputation, okay? I think that's the most important part in as a general, thank you. Amal, please.
Thank you, Jason. And if you don't mind, with your permission, I'm actually going to share my screen because I want to draw attention to something from everyone. Can everyone see my screen okay? Excellent.
Yes.
So the title of this is Landforms, 地形变. And the first section is about what we would think of as the terrain, the forms of land. Second section, almost entirely unmentioned. This is about the condition of your soldiers. Third section, it gets just sort of a very cursory mention. Actually, I don't even know that it's mentioned here. It's mentioned in the fourth section briefly, and then the fifth. So why does he refer to this as the forms of land when really it seems to be more the forms of your military and their condition? And this goes back to something that we actually talked about 5 chapters ago about the symbolism that exists within this work and how Pan-Asian concepts have a way of filtering in. So we talked about these yin and yang pairs that we found throughout, right? Back then it was things like water and stone, Dao and Fa, heaven and earth, defend, attack. Here, and we mentioned Xing then in comparison to Shi, which was something that's formed and more concrete versus something very mutable, very circumstantial, very sort of ephemeral, this potential energy that we're looking at. So when he's talking about land forms, he's talking about things that are more immutable than Shi. They are solid, they're baked in, we might say. But if you look at the theme that's discussed here, that estimating the enemy forces and planning for victory, being able to fight even when you're told not to, or retreat even when we're talking about mutable forms. They may be baked in, but they are within a general's control. They have a mutability. Whereas that sort of first category of distinct land categories are just fixed. If it is an impasse ground, it is an impasse ground. There's nothing you do to change what it is. You change how you address it. That's what he's telling you here. The rest of this then is saying, these things may seem fixed, but they are not fixed. You can change how you can address it, and you can change it immediately before it escalates into a calamity of collapse or turmoil or the sort of DEFCON situational condition we talked about in the previous chapter. So here, when he says, thus, the general who advances without pursuing fame and retreats without eschewing accusation, and we've talked about what are principles that exist here, because the whole thing reads Machiavellian sort of any port in a storm, by any means necessary. But he says, the general whose only goal is to protect the people and benefit his lord. That should be your lodestone. That should be the thing that when you are sent to march off, you are always keeping in your mind. And that is the thing that even with baked in conditions, there is a way of addressing them. And that's really what he's getting at here is there are baked in conditions or things that may seem baked in. And I keep using that term because it's just a neologism that we use to say unavoidable, that we can't seem to it is a feature, not a bug. He's saying these features, there are a couple that you will have to account for, because the form of the land, the form of the terrain, if you are walking into a quagmire, it's not going to not be a quagmire because you know of it. But there are things you can do. One is to not walk into it. Ideally, make your enemy come through it and take them out by pretending or indicating or giving them some incentive. Dangle that carrot in front of them that says, hey, we've got them on the run. Go into the quagmire. Oh, welcome to Afghanistan. You're not leaving. So these are mutable versus immutable changes that are challenges that he's addressing to a general, to a prince, and to everybody else who's reading these, and saying, knowledge is your greatest weapon for addressing these. And that's something Jason mentioned, that knowing the forms of land is his real key here. Knowledge and control of information is the greatest asset that a general or any person has when engaging in something as high stakes as the art of war.
Excellent comments. Just want to make one, brief comment. This is kind of what Quan was getting at a little bit earlier with this idea of dialectical. Essentially it's between strategy, to a certain extent, and how that fits into the ground itself. And then how this all comes together. And I think that's, kind of gets back to how I like how you captured it with mutable and immutable, and then what there is control over and not. So, David.
Oh, Carly disappeared. Did Carly want to say something? Okay.
Oh, Carly.
It's okay. I lost it. Actually, no, I remembered. Sorry. Thank you for that, guys.
Go ahead, Carly.
I had recognized actually that one of the, I think sort of maybe to Quan's influence, I noticed that if this were a metaphor, say, for a body or how one acted daily, it has a lot of parallels in that respect. And so when you think of a war and life and the battles which you have to choose, each individual action you have to take, it does very much depend on the character of the general in recognizing moderation and ability to attack and where sources are weak or strong. This really played back into chapter, I think, 5 and 6 for me when I saw that in the parallel too. But yeah, the importance of recognizing all the different variations and aspects literally come to mind on a physical level, and then to Quan's point, on a very mental level. And yeah, keeping those emotions and everything else in check about what the actual intent is.
Thank you, Carly. David.
Yeah. The thing that struck me as problematic is about the middle of the middle part, which is fighting producing victory means you can disregard the ruler's command at that point, and fighting where you won't have victory. Well, I understand that avoiding fighting where it's a situation necessary destruction and decimation and loss. But this other one, if you get a late command from the ruler saying, no, we have a diplomatic solution, and you're in a winning position, that can't be what this is saying, is that you take your winning position and overwhelm the enemy at this point, because it is a sense in which you're disrespecting the higher information, the higher knowledge. It narrows the focus only to the general's point of view, when that doesn't seem to be the encompassing thing in every situation. So not sure what this is really getting at. And like a parody example of this is the movie Failsafe, where you now know you're going to make your bomb run is going to make it to Moscow, and you are going to get this nuclear bomb dropped on your target, and you're ignoring the signals from home saying the president has overridden that instruction. Don't do this. You have to tie back to the highest level of command. So I'm a little confused about what the lesson we're getting is. Thanks.
Well, let me quickly, that's a good point, and
Very good point.
I think that's always a question, right? So one, I just try to defend what Sun Tzu said. Okay, so
Okay, I think of it in terms of what was just said before about this being a body, the highest level of command. You know, consciousness, the ultimate. You know, that should take. There should be something that overweens the mere attack. Yeah, and yeah. So
yeah. Let me just kind of respond to your thing. You know, that's for this situation, right? If you are the general, you know you are winning, and they have a diplomatic solution. You probably still want to fight. You want to ignore the diplomatic solution because you know the ruler may not know you are winning, and they sacrifice a lot. You know, try to make a peace on that. So you still ignore it, right? I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I just said that probably one of the case. You know, and the one thing it's probably very common is a difficult solution. For example, the movie or the novel, the All Quiet on the Western Line, right? You will see they try to make a peace, but the general still want to fight. Even they know he's losing, but he still want to fight. So that's always the situation. I'm not trying to say which one is right, but you know that's always the situation.
Yeah, I think that they're both right. I do look at this as almost separate from the prince or the administrative body, that diplomatic solutions. This particular chapter, I can see where David's coming from, very much so. Anyway, James, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to comment on. It does seem like a dilemma, but on the other hand, if the ruler calls for it to stop, the ruler is just like a guy with a throne, right? You know, like it's not necessarily something that is there's different ways of measuring this. In other words, if there's a fight that can continue, maybe the general knows when to call the fight off. In other words, if the general knows that the Tao of the situation is that he's going to win, and he knows that the ruler has bad information, then having a victory probably won't hurt. And actually, he'll have resentment possibly from the ruler, but he'll still have the cred for winning the victory. If it's going to if the Tao is that the fight kind of needs to stop because there's not going to be a victory, there's just going to be loss of life, or it's all in doubt, then it's the timing is kind of the general's call, because once again, the ruler's not there. He doesn't know exactly what's happening on the ground. If the general calls it off, and he just reports back to the ruler that our fights were decimated, we had all these losses, and we're not going to be able to, we couldn't be able to continue. So even though you said to fight to the last man or whatever it was, I realized that they had overpowered us. So, or that we could have a much better advantage by waiting another day and continuing in new circumstances. So at least the general would have some kind of an explanation, some kind of a comeback to the ruler. And then the worst case, right, would be Jack D. Ripper, General Jack D. Ripper from Dr. Strangelove, actually starts World War III. And then you have, you know, the president trying to call back the bombers, but it's kind of difficult. And because oh yeah, I remember I don't want to give you the spoilers, but I watched that recently again with my son. You know, I needed a refresher, and he had never seen it before, so it was a wonderful experience. I recommend it to everyone if you haven't seen it. But you know, just stiff upper lip when you're watching it. It's good sort of following this book too. Jack D. Ripper is not the guy who you want commanding your nuclear forces, but you know, there are bad candidates for any job.
Is that George C. Scott?
No, that's the other guy. That's
okay.
what's his name? I have it here.
Sorry.
It is Sterling Hayden. Sterling
Okay.
Hayden.
Yeah, forgive me. It's been a while.
He's General George C. Scott is the guy at the Pentagon. Judge General Buck Turgidson.
Yeah, I'm going to make a really quick comment. I know because we're running out of time, but I do want to just say this. I just think this comes down to a basic understanding of the problem and information in and of itself. Who has the best information, right? And if if I always think about this in terms of the general, just because you're able to diagnose a problem doesn't mean you should exact the solution. So you understand there's a problem that exists on the ground. However, whoever has better information, whether it be the prince or whether it be the general, ought to be, exacting the solution in this particular instance. So anyway, that's just my thought. And then Quan, and then Laura.
Yeah, I don't have the book all laid out before me, but I know one of the themes that I've noticed is one of humility. And, I guess that comes from this sort of know thyself, and your own limitations. And then I would point out, I think David, that this general who advances with no thought of his own glory or retreats the troops regardless of the punishment he receives, and only strives for the good of the people and the emperor's advantage, is a treasure to the state. So I would say that, probably it would be the case that there was propounded this idea that there was a diplomatic solution to the war, and that cable or wire or whatever was sent to the battlefield. That would probably, in terms of Sun Tzu's narrative here, argument, the good general would say, oh, okay, great. I'm out. Let's pull the troops back.
Thank you, Anne. We'll go to Quan and then Laura, and then Jason, do you want to do 4 and 5 together, or how do you want to do this?
That's a stop here, and then we will do the 4 and 5 and for the next week, and probably we can have a overview. Look like a lot of people are very interested in this chapter, so I don't want to rush. So we can have a more general discussion on chapter 10, and then because the chapter 11 is quite difficult, so probably we will can only cover Sun Tzu have more category. He called it 9 land. Okay, so instead of the form of land, okay, because this one is talk of 6 forms of land, right? Next chapter they talk of the 9 lands or ground. Okay, Among and I still debating what would be the best translation. Okay, so what do you mean the difference between forms and the lands? That's another big question, and then probably want to go a little bit detail on the chapter 11. So we probably can focus on, based on today's experience, people like to talk about this kind of category. Then I believe next week we probably have more thing to discuss on why Sun Tzu put the 9. Do I call it the 9 lands? Okay, 9 different.
You have 9 situations. Is
9 situations. Yeah. So that will be another. And then after this, then the rest will be. I assume it's much easier. So that's the hurdle. I call it the 9 lands. And then this one called 6 forms of land. Then you can think about what's the difference, the 9 lands and the 6 forms of, or 6 forms of land. Okay, anyway.
Quan, then followed by Laura.
Okay, so as you know, I like very much to make general category, and I would say that here the word forms in the Sun Tzu in general, and especially in this chapter 10 or 9, no 10, it's about one special form that I would like to name universal history. Okay, because the drama that is playing in the Sun Tzu is the transition from the aristocratic society towards a non-aristocratic society. Okay, so you have all kinds of considerations about the general, the sovereigns, and their personal loyalties to each other. Because when you send a general on the battleground, you have to be sure of his intention and his loyalty, and not only of his operational capability or even his imagination in terms of a commander-in-chief. And you see that in the Sun Tzu from chapter 1 to the end, there will be plenty of psychological consideration, and it's absolutely normal because let's not forget it was an aristocratic world. So in an aristocratic world, the general is sent to the battlefield is either a cousin, a brother, or even a commoner, but an especially talented, even a genius as a commoner, and as commoner can be tempted to take the throne. So it's very interesting to discuss about the operational capabilities, who has the best information and so on. But when we already discuss about those things, we already assume that there is perfect loyalty and the perfect commonality of intention between the three different layers, meaning the sovereign, the commander-in-chief, and the officers on the ground, which is far to be certain in an aristocratic world. And one of the form that is in play here, in this drama here, that we find at each chapter from the first one to the 13, is that we have that slow transition from two practical legacies of the Zhou dynasty. The first, the Zhou dynasty began to rule in 1046 BCE, as I said many times, and they were truly kings from 1046 BCE to 770, and from 770 to the 256 BC, they lost their kingly powers and they were only political arbiters and control models. However, in the first part of their rule, their legacies was precisely that aristocratic world in the social dimension, but also the beginning of a kind of aristocratic mentality that would be inherited in later ages by the Chinese, and would be perfectly articulated in terms of a program, an educational program called Confucianism. Okay, at the beginning, it was only for the nobleman, and with time, it would be transferred slowly and slowly to the general population. And here we see the drama happening around 500 BCE concerning that form, which is the transfer of the aristocratic mentality from a small group of the Chinese population to a bigger group of population through a stuff called Confucianism, or I prefer to say to use the Chinese expression, Rujia, the school of the scholars. And that process, that form in transformation or in transition or in process of transfer to a bigger population in China is still active nowadays. And I stopped here.
Thank you for that, Quan. Laura, that was excellent.
You're on mute, Laura.
Yeah. Still unmute.
I am
There you
unmuted.
go. There. Now you're
Yeah.
unmuted.
I mean, I appreciate all this discussion. But the issue that seems, there seems an immediacy in terms of the information that gets passed to the general. And in some sense, the people who were sent to, tell the general what was going on, or the person who was there to publicize what information, I think that the key people in the whole process of it are the people who are transmitting the information. And I'm certain it's not one person, but it's a series of people, so that the information arrives quickly to the general, because in most likelihood, the general is not near the battlefield. So I think that there's a certain level of implicit trust that has to be given to these carriers of information, because in a sense, they could make or break what's happening on the battlefield. And I think, when you talk sort of about how the situation is changing from aristocratic, those people in effect could be changing history, and because they could be changing what was going on in the battlefield, very much so, if they wanted to, if that was their desire, to see the aristocracy perhaps disappear. I don't know if that is it at all, but that would be something, leaves me as an open question in all of this. Who is the liability in terms of the winners of the.
Yeah, information transfer and motives actually have to definitely be captured as part of this. So yeah, I mean, and this is part of how to make decisions, and under these types of circumstances, you have to consider everything, including the motives of the war and the motives of the general.
But also the motives of the soldiers that are carrying the information.
That too. Yeah, exactly. There's no text that are going back and forth. So, Aman.
I got to be quick because I'm almost out of time. But Laura, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I feel like you've been reading ahead in the book, because if there's, amongst everything else, the protracted argument of the Sun Tzu is information, intel, gathering intel. Intelligence is the most key, fundamental, and necessary component for good military usage, strategy, tactics, execution. And here, what I think Laura hit on, and what David was getting at before about what if they want to call a truce, and in the chat I just said there weren't phones. Information's partial. It's always partial. You're going to both collect it and or obfuscate it in a piecemeal fashion. And you want as much control of that as you can possibly have to be effective in this sort of contest of wills. There's no way to get it absolutely perfect, but he will talk in chapter 13 about the best of all bad options, which is buy it from the other side. Buy it from people whose loyalties are up for sale, and pay a hefty price, because it's worth it. It's much cheaper to pay a good spy than it is to field a whole army. You want to do two things as the strategy mover in the art of war. You want to both sanitize and enhance your information intake, and corrupt, obfuscate, and dole out as desired the information the other side is collecting. And he's given us the start of how to do this, how to look for it, how to think about it. It's going to get much more detailed as we go on, until it gets very granular down to the who you should hire, why you should hire them, and how much you should pay them. But not before we get to, and if that doesn't work, just, burn the whole damn thing down. But here's what to consider if you're going to try that too, because in arid land, it's not going to work. So you need to know which way the wind's blowing, both literally and figuratively. I needed this. I thank you all. I had a great time tonight. I look forward to the end of 10 and 11 next week. And yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
I love hearing from old voices and new. So that was Jen.
It was a Thank you so much, Aman. Thank you for your comments as always. It was wonderful, and I needed it as well. It was a great, great meeting.
Yeah,
Appreciate
sorry,
everything
I
everybody
probably
said.
need to go in any minutes. So
Okay.
thank you, everyone. And next week we will continue on the two short paragraph on this chapter, and then we go to the chapter 11. One thing for next week, okay, if you want to be a good parent, that's another good advice from this paragraph. And we will spend a lot of time talking about the land, and some translation called situation. So actually, if you want to think about how to apply for your situation, the land, if you translate as a situation, that's probably another way to think about. If you are in business, that could be your marketplace. Okay, so that would be the thing I have to say, and then